Welcome to A Photographer's Life, the channel that takes you behind the curtain into the world of professional architectural photography. Join us now for an episode with some of America's premier architectural photographers. Today's broadcast comes from a recent Zoom meeting of the Association of Independent Architectural Photographers. This discussion is led by AIAP Director Alan Blakely. We hope you enjoy the show. If you do, please let us know by liking this episode and subscribing to this channel. Now, on with the show.
I'd like to welcome everybody to the March AIAP discussion, and the topic this morning is lighting architectural interiors. And I want to welcome everyone here. This is a good group to get started this morning, and I appreciate you all taking time to kick this off. And as we mentioned earlier in the pre-meeting kind of conversation, that we wanted to talk about the theory and philosophy behind lighting interiors more than necessarily the technique and equipment that might be involved, because those kinds of things change over time. But the theory of lighting interiors, those style changes, the theory behind it really doesn't. And I'm kind of reminded, as we start out here, years ago, there was a photographer, Dean Collins. Some of you will remember Dean from the 1980s. He was a pretty prolific workshop presenter and just an overall great guy. I really liked Dean. But one of the things that he would kind of hammer home, no matter what he was talking about lighting-wise, was the fact that all lighting ever did was control a shadow and create a highlight. That was really the essence of photographic lighting. And I think in architectural interiors, that's really what our aim is. But it's the how we do it that is the style that we put behind that. And so in kicking that off, I kind of want to go that direction. Ansel Adams used to say that before he developed the zone system with Fred Archer, that really the only thing he had to teach when he would do workshops and when he was teaching classes at the Art Center was how he did things. And if we look on YouTube, that's pretty much what's on there is how the individual, I hate to say photographer, I'll say influencer, does things. Is that being disparaging? Well, it was kind of, maybe it was meant to be. But the gimmicks and things like that, not necessarily all that useful unless you're in that exact same situation, which you really never are. And I know there's a number here who present workshops. Barry Grossman here, who's with us, teaches workshops, and I know Barry's technique and philosophy, and so I look forward to hearing from him because he can add to this along that same attitude as well. So again, welcome to everybody, and just want to kick this off and talk about your approach to lighting interiors and kind of where you start and where you hope to end up, and if you can offer any enlightenment along the way. So anybody want to kick us off here with some words of wisdom?
I have a question, Alan,
Yeah.
and to everybody else. A lot of times when I am shooting interiors, I use bracketed shots, and I'm just wondering how many of you folks out there use bracketed versus using your, your lights off the camera and everything.
It depends, Gerald, on the situation.
Yeah.
Sometimes we'll light a scene, and other times, because of the space or whatever, we'll have to do a bracket. But I think being able to, to be well versed in both of those techniques is important. You talk about when I go into a room, the first thing I look at is it's basic. Everybody does this, but if the room is facing east, what time do we shoot that? We shoot that in the afternoon. If it's, for me, if it's west, I shoot it and so forth. So the direction of the sun has a big influence on when I start shooting. And I'm always looking for that cobalt blue in the evening. So I'm always, planning my shots and my lighting so that I can get that for my dust shots, because I think that just adds so much beauty to and feel to a shot. But being able to use brackets as well as lighting gear, that sometimes a combination of both. but that's important in getting the shot right.
It's kind of unique to each situation, isn't it? I mean, that's the way I approach it, is that every situation is unique, and you got to apply the right technique. For me, it's kind of like fly fishing. I can't use the same fly on every river on every day.
I always
It's
like that analogy, fishing out analogy, Alan.
well, thank you.
I love that he has time to go fly fishing.
Oh yeah, I'm totally impressed. But we know
Yeah.
Alan's lifestyle.
Well,
Well, no, the
I
When I
hard.
grow up, I want to be Alan, you know.
I understand each situation is different, but I seem a lot of times because of my client's schedule, sometimes I don't have the luxury of shooting it when I would like to shoot it. And I'm just wondering how you guys handle something like that with your clients.
Yeah. Well, I won't shoot a room. If someone's got an east exposure and they want me to shoot it in the morning, I will decline that because
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not going to go through the post of having to clean that up. And all the lighting in the world isn't, I mean, that's difficult to do, especially if it's a residential application. Uh,
Right.
Sometimes you could scare a homeowner to death by bringing your gear in if it's a high-end home. You got to think about that because it's a lot of equipment. On a commercial shoot, it's a different story. But so on a residential shoot, I use less equipment and probably more bracketing, but I'm also cognizant of the time of where the sun is at so that I can get a proper exposure. I can't stand blown out windows, blown out window treatments, and blown out lights. That's not photography to me.
I'm
So
with you.
yeah.
Well, I'm the same way. What you mentioned there. I had a situation last week where I declined to do the shoot at the time that the client wanted to do it, just because I knew that the photography was not going to work.
Right.
So my son and I came back several days later at a completely different time of day, and did it, and it was successful. But you just kind of have to assess those things, and that's where applications like Sun Surveyor on an iPhone or whatever are really useful in seeing where that sun's going to be during the day. And then also, if you have the luxury of walking the space ahead of time,
Mhm.
and understanding what needs to happen in the space. And I mean, I don't miss the days of carrying a truckload of area lights to a location, and dichroic filters and all that kind of stuff to shoot on film, and then all the multiple exposures on a single sheet of film. I don't miss that at all, but you kind of have to have that same mindset um, of what's it going to take to get it as right as possible on the initial capture. Am I off base here? Is anybody?
No, I don't, Alan, I agree with you completely. When someone calls us out for a shoot, that goes for all of us. We're the experts. And if they say what needs to be done at this time and it can't, then you just need to be honest with them. You're compromising the look, and I won't deliver anything to a client that's not perfect. I'm not putting my name on it. So it's, call somebody else. I don't care.
Yeah, that's why I like to go scout the location first. But I also want to mention we all live in different regions,
Yeah.
and so the lighting's different. Some
Yeah.
photographers like the daylight coming in through the windows late in the day, fairly strong. That's kind of like their trademark. But it is difficult if it's a strong light coming through, and you got to deal with that, and you're dealing with the homeowner. But if you know, I minored in meteorology when I was going to school before I went to Brooks, and that makes a big difference, especially here in Oregon. It's
Mm.
just a moving target, and like Alan's saying, it's like fishing. You just got to know what you're dealing with, and know and anticipate where it's going to be going.
Hmm.
Sometimes it works out well on, say, on a summer day. Um, I'm not saying this is always the rule, but from like say 10 to 2, that sun's going to be pretty much above whatever the building you're going to be shooting. So it's not going to be strongly lit coming through. But if it is coming through later in the day, it's a little bit more diffused. It has that nice look. Also, I want to mention lighting styles. I know I'm going a different direction here real quick. Lighting styles are evolving, right?
Yeah.
It's whatever the trend is. Now, commercial is different than, say, residential. But if you look at residential now and some of the moody light, so that's a whole nother ballgame. So, um, it's not just the same lighting that it was 10 years ago. Commercially it could be, but I feel on editorial for magazines, it's changed. We'll look at a lot darker shadows.
There's another calculation that I make, which is about post. So it's in the end, it's about money. Am I going to spend too much time, more time than I would like in post, or should I just go ahead and light? So that's another thing that I take into consideration. It depends. Sometimes the homes that I'm shooting in residential, well, or commercial, you have a limited amount of time to get in there. So that decision kind of has been made for me, that I'm going to have to spend more time in post in order just to get the shots that I'm contracted for. But other times it's just, well, for instance, I shot a big room. It had giant windows, east and west side. There was going to be light coming in one way or another. And it was a living room that was the size of a hotel lobby. So I had to light it. And the only way I could light it was with what we used to call China balls, which create a big diffused light. And I just run them up to the ceiling and just blast. And it looks fine. It looks totally natural. But it saved me time in post, even though it took more time to set up the lights. Sometimes it's the reverse.
Yeah.
Well, I'll jump in and comment on that, Barry. Because from my perspective, and I won't talk too much philosophy, but just addressing the time factor, from my experience in my work, I'm spending more time when I'm spending more time on set lighting. So for me, the simplicity of shooting without lights, and truthfully, that is rare for me, generally lends itself towards the simplicity of post-processing, because now I'm just dealing with one frame that I'm massaging, and I do all my work inside of Capture One these days. And it's a one frame kind of process and tweaking and perfecting and making it the way I want. And if I need to go to Photoshop for a little, retouching, I will. Whereas my lighting for me these days is more about light layering and shooting multiple layers. And so if I'm spending more time in post dealing with all those lighting layers, it stands to reason that I've probably spent a little more time doing the lighting. So it's a little bit contrary to what you've just laid out. I think the quicker post generally is relating to the quicker shots on set as well. Setting aside all the other stuff that's going to be consistent either way, setting up the right camera, setting the camera up in the correct position, correct compositions, correct vantage point, perfecting, the scene as it were. That always has to happen. Then the question is, are we going to spend the time to illuminate it? And I think that's more of a question of individual style as photographers. And certainly, I think David said that the styles have changed and that approach has changed, especially for residential work, and that most people, published at least seemingly, are not even employing lights at all. And a lot of the people that I'm mentoring these days are saying, I don't know how to light. I don't light. Why even light? Right? That's a bigger conversation that I'm hoping we could have, but I won't go too long. But just wanted to say that for me, shooting faster typically means less time in post, not the other way around.
Well, the other part of that, another factor in all that too, is that there are people who think it's a rule that you never have the lights on in a room. I personally like having lights on in a room because I think it creates a little more
I
dynamic.
just did a LinkedIn post on that. Turn the lights on. I can't.
Yeah, but you look at these you look at AD Lux magazine, no lights on.
No,
I know.
Because they don't know what they're doing.
Well, I
No,
think
that's the style. No, it's been like that for the last 10, 15 years.
the
For
art direction.
national
The art direction.
interior magazines that are worth it,
yeah.
no lights on.
I shoot both ways if I think it's something that's going to end up in my portfolio, because I want to cover myself. So it does two things, though, for me. to have the lights on. One is it creates interest because particularly in the back of the photo, it draws the eye toward there. But it also creates problems because then you've got color temperature issues that you have to deal with. At that point, I'm also thinking about post, because the post, the way that I do it, and I'm thinking about that while I'm shooting, is I use a plugin, which we've talked about here. I know we're not supposed to talk equipment, but plugins are not really equipment. It's just, it's electrons. It's a different kind of a thing.
Says Barry.
And I use Infuse in Lightroom. And so I can take one photo and massage it at one color temperature and another photo that I'm going to blend at a different color temperature and put them together. And it looks more like it really looks to the human eye when I'm done with it. So, but that's also factoring in speed. How much effort is this going to be? Should I just set up some lights? That also goes into my decision making at the moment.
I was just going to say, if my fee allows me to invest like the whole day in the shoot, I like to shoot every room in the interior of residential or commercial in the morning, and then shoot every room all over again in the afternoon. And I find that some rooms look spectacular with sun beating in them and hitting some of the nice things inside. And other rooms look a whole lot better with no sun coming in the windows. And oftentimes I'm surprised at which one in post looks the best. So I like to go around and shoot every room morning and every room afternoon if I have the time.
Yeah, I would do that as long as they're paying for it. I mean,
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. If I get a decent enough fee, I do that.
Perfect world. But I was just going to chime in one more time on what Barry was talking about the color temperature concerns, about lights on versus lights off. Those are photographer concerns, right? Those are not client concerns most of the time, even though every now and again I might hear from a client, rarely, saying, oh, we want the lights off because of the color, blah, 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 blah. Most of the time that doesn't enter their minds. I think this is more of a stylistic approach, concern for them, whether they want the lights on or off, not a technical one. And it's interesting, I've even had some commercial clients who sell lighting, believe it or not, chandeliers, those, high-end lighting, sconces, things of that nature, where they want the lights off stylistically, because perhaps the light on is a distraction to the shape and the form of the light that they're not selling filaments, right? They're selling lighting. So it's an interesting, from a conceptual standpoint, and I scratched my head over this one. Well, wait a minute. I'm photographing chandeliers in this particular case for your catalog, but we're not turning them on. And they're like, yeah, we don't want them on. But this wasn't a technical reason. This was, a style reason. So I actually think it's kind of an interesting discussion that it should be more about a style and what helps the client's design, look better in the photographs, what sells their work more effectively, what keeps them on brand better, I suppose, whether we're shooting with lights on, lights off, and more kind of broadly, do we take time to illuminate the interiors for them? That's kind of, I think the artistry of illumination is what we're really talking about, and how often are photographers able to control, their tools in a way that doesn't distract from the design that we're taking pictures of. Because I think a lot of photographers are understand lighting and do it well from a technical perspective, but like David's saying, certainly for a decade, maybe more, the trend has been shoot it natural. And as a photographer, for me, I'd like to think I have a signature on my look, that things don't necessarily look natural. I need to walk that fine line of pleasing them and pleasing myself at the same time, right? Otherwise, why hire me, right? So I think that's kind of the philosophical challenge these days: is how much lighting should we be doing, and how much lighting can we do and still manage to deliver a look that our client wants.
I think that's an important path to go down for just a little bit, Barry. And looking back, I shadowed a photographer on an AD shoot probably 35 years ago, or maybe 30 years ago. Anyway, and lighting styles were completely different there, and she basically overrode the entire lighting design in the home. It was her light, that was the style that was there. She introduced and created the lighting style there completely. And it had nothing whatever to do with what was existing in the home. And it was beautiful, but and the interior designer at the time, loved it and everything. And the magazine was very pleased with the situation, but you could not get away with that now. There is no way on earth that would happen now. And AD and the other magazines that David mentioned earlier, their editorial style has gone completely away from that. And so I like to think that I can contribute something, just like Barry was talking about, and I want to contribute that to the extent that I can and get away with it, and still have it look right for the client. And that's a hard one sometimes, because if I give him reality, if I just do it like a single capture of what the existing lighting is, that's not going to work. They're not going to be happy with that. It's not going to reproduce well, for one thing. And you look at the contrast gain in some of these magazines, even like AD or Lux or whatever, and the shadows are dumped off and the highlights are blown out. And for my mind, I don't want that. I don't want my name on that. So I'm going to massage that contrast range. And if I have to do it with lighting, that's one thing. But
Yeah. I think that's important, Alan. But the other thing is, I was thinking just, I last year I think we gained 5 or 6 new clients going back and reshooting because the previous photographer shot with the lights off and the images look dead. So I'm not talking about having the lights so strong that they overpower the image or distract from the
No.
scene. We have to be able to control that.
Mhm.
But having that balance, that's important. Yeah.
One of my main clients that I've worked with for 10 years, about a month ago, said they would like all the lights off in the residential shots. And in Seattle, Washington, the light isn't always really strong outside to eliminate the space. So I've had to relearn really expanding the bracketing that I do, and I'm able to get what they like. But it's surprising to me because they won several awards with the old way I shot, and now they want this natural look. So I'm struggling with that a bit.
Do they have a new marketing director?
Yeah. So I work with a lot of interior designers, and lighting is such an important part of the design element. I mean, they want to showcase that because it affects the mood of the room, the ambience of the room, the whole feel, and to have the light off. My clients anyway, because like I said, I work majority with interior designers. They want them on.
Say, would any of you guys ever deliver 2 versions of the shot with the lights on and then with the lights off?
I don't.
Depends who the client is, honestly. Like if it's a very specific, and that's a great question. If it's a specific client, like let's say for example, like a home theater design firm, or somebody that does millwork, that does home theaters or kitchens, those types of specific commercial companies might be able to use those 2 different versions. Like, so maybe one angle might have a window in it and it feels more day, feels like an early morning light kind of vibe. Maybe I'll shut the lights off for that picture. But then maybe another composition that shows the whole kitchen, for example, not a home theater because that might trend like more like an evening look, but let's say a kitchen shot, the same kitchen that maybe shows the whole thing a little bit more like front on, like a 1-point perspective. Maybe for that, it feels pretty good to turn on all the lights because I can see the recessed lighting. So I think for those types of clients, it's kind of probably acceptable to give them variation, but more, and again, there's no rules, but I would think for like the designer clients, more than likely the designer wants that space to feel consistent from shot to shot. So to mix and match, night, like back in the day, I would shoot, nighttime images in a living space and daytime images, and they really didn't feel great together, back in the days of film and even at the early onset of shooting digital. I actually think for the designer shoots, it makes more sense to make everything feel like as if it's happening at that same moment or close, right? And I wouldn't change lighting schemes in a bedroom necessarily, if that makes sense, for a designer client at least.
Now, if you look at Toll Brothers, you guys are all familiar with Toll Brothers, the
Of
builder.
course.
They're all on, okay, pretty bright. But again, I think it might depend on the region and the market. But in Portland here, I'm generalizing, but most of the high-end interior designers
Yeah.
lights off. But I don't want to spend this whole conversation lights on, lights off. But I use strobe to sometimes to supplement the daylight coming in to make it still look natural because I think strobe sharpens things. I think it cleans up the color temperature and so on. So I've been doing that for years now. With some of the equipment that we're using now, we can go with a little bit more natural, but I don't mind using lighting because I was trained on lighting, so I like to bring it in. And I think sometimes you go to a shoot, and I think Norma's talked about this. You go to a shoot and you just show up with your camera rather than having some equipment with you, and the guy saying, "Why am I paying you this without any equipment?" Right? So another way of looking at it.
That's why you got to bring a little laptop or an iPad to shoot to that. I find people are way more impressed with the fact that I can shoot wirelessly to an iPad. Well, I would like to say one thing about these kinds of expectations on the part of clients are where are they looking, and what they're looking at are Dwell, Architectural Digest. They're looking at ads for kitchens in online and in newspapers and so forth. And the lighting styles can be very different. One of the things that I tell my students, for instance, I don't teach architectural lighting, but my business students is to pay attention to how all of that changed. So very briefly, and I know we've talked about this in the past, Architectural Digest had the style that everybody tried to duplicate in one way or another. Whether you liked it or not, it's a non-issue. That was the style. And then Dwell came along, and Dwell started shooting using non-architectural photographers in many cases, using lifestyle photographers and fashion photographers. But they were also shooting houses that were urban houses. When you looked out the window, you saw potentially a really ugly house out there, not the attractive modern house that was brand new that this adorable young couple with their little puppy and small children, always in the photos. What you saw was a bungalow, an ugly bungalow next door. So the lighting included blowing out the windows, which would never been a thing before.
No.
And you had to kind of now take that into consideration. And I do think about that when I'm shooting in an urban environment where the thing is ugly out there. I never get pushback when I make sure that whatever's out there that's not attractive is not obvious, clearly seen. So that's a kind of consideration to take in terms of lighting as well.
Yeah, see, I wouldn't blow out the windows, Barry. I would change the scene. I mean, if it's that distracting or that hideous outside, I'm not going to compromise the interior look or the window treatments or the trim work or anything like that. Because if you blow it out, you lose those details. So I would just, for me personally, I would just change the scene.
Well, I retain those details in the way I do it. So yeah, I think you have to show the interior is what you're getting paid for. So
right.
You have to retain that, and it is possible to do it. It's just, sometimes it's frankly just a matter of getting out the burner Dodge brush and you just down. I mean,
But Barry, getting back to Dwell. Dwell is on its own spectrum over there. They got some pretty bizarre layouts, and it's like I said, it's more editorial. You compare AD with Dwell, and Dwell is just sometimes they kind of push that envelope a little bit, to me, a little bit past, but I subscribe to Dwell, and I like to see different photographers from around the world that contribute. But sometimes,
Well, the thing to also is that Architectural Digest wants the original editor had been there since, I don't know, the 1870s or so. When I may be exaggerating slightly, when she left, they started looking more like Dwell. And then Dwell their photography in some respects started looking more like Architectural Digest. So now it's really become a much more free-for-all. There are magazines that have kind of looks and so forth, and you see certain kitchen appliance ads, which always include kitchens, of course, kitchen cabinets. They look different too. So it's really just a bit of what do we like as photographers, and we get hired in part because the client likes our take on things, whether it is matching what Dwell does or Architectural Digest or Sub-Zero Kitchens, whatever. So those are all things that you sort of take into consideration as well. It's just knowledge about what the looks are that are out there.
And I just want to kind of interject here that I think editorial look is one thing in and of itself, but most of the people that we work for are not going to be editorial clients, and mostly because we don't make any money on them. But the commercial clients, they aren't necessarily going to want to have that kind of a look. That's been my experience anyway, and I suspect from what I see in the advertising in magazines that's not what manufacturers and other people want as well. I see stuff in AD and I think, how did this guy get hired? I couldn't get away with this. My local interior designer would not put up with this. How did this get published? And so I just think that there's a more polished style that we're held to for most of the work that we do,
particularly commercial work.
Yeah, and so I work for a lot of manufacturers of different things, architectural products and furniture and those kinds of things, and they want a very polished style. And Barry does workshops. Barry Grossman does workshops where it's a very polished, deliberate style, and it's not what you'd see in an editorial piece necessarily in AD or Dwell or something like that. But to me, it is such a much more elevated look that that's what I think the industry should be aspiring to. Not this, I can get away with this kind of thing by not using any lighting and not doing any processing and that kind of stuff.
I've been doing this for 30 plus years, and so I certainly in the film days went and lit everything. And, also in my background, father and grandfather both being architects. And what I didn't like in the film days was we created our own lighting and our own environment, which was something that the architect should have considered in their design of the space. Now, I will say this has a little bit to do with clientele, and most of my clients are architects, and in the commercial world, it can be different. We did work for American Express, and when we did the work for American Express, we certainly went in and lit things. But I will say, generally speaking, I want there to be some authenticity to the design, and especially if if there's a lighting designer involved, if I come in and I relight the entire space, they can't use it for awards because one of the things that they have to sign off is what's being conveyed is what they actually did. But I think everything has its place and time. But in my work, I would say more often than not, I'm trying to, and it doesn't mean that we don't make corrections in post, because that obviously gets corrected. But I certainly do not go in and relight spaces in their entirety to create an entire mood, which can be very viable for certain clients and certain needs. But I'm just saying it's not where I'm at.
And most people probably aren't. Or they probably would agree. with you. I guess the debatable topic is, and you use the great word, authenticity. At what point is what we're doing tarnishing that authenticity of what they've done? And I know, that's a philosophical difference that is an interesting conversation. And I have several great quality photographers who believe pretty much what you said, Brad, and that, there's an inauthentic vibe if you change the look of a space. I guess that comes down to each of us as photographers, business people, and comes down to what our clients will allow us to do creatively, how long that leash is. But it also comes down to how well we control our lighting instruments, and are we using them to change the vibe, or are we using them to enhance their vibe in a way that doesn't step on it, right? But that's a fine line, you know, I struggle with that myself all the time. How
part of
far to
that,
go, right?
I think part of that calculation is how good is the design. So very often, if you're working at a higher end, whether it's residential or commercial, these are every decision has been very carefully considered. And these are typically, well, can be very successful people. And one of the reasons they're successful is because of a kind of matchup of the aesthetics all the way down the line. The architect and the interior designer and who knows who else are all kind of aligned throughout the project. And so part of our job is to portray that. So if we make it different, they're going to be unhappy because they spend a lot of time thinking about how this damn thing is supposed to look. That's partly I've come to that because I've learned not to argue with the architects too extensively when they tell me where they want the camera to be put. They've thought about this for sometimes for years.
Right.
And the different parties that they've had to answer to, their client may have, obviously have some aesthetic considerations, partly leading to how they hired the interior designer, the architect, and the lighting people, and all the rest of it. So yeah, that's part of our job, is to just be truthful. But it's still, we're not journalists, and as the saying goes, the map is not the territory. So you just do the best you can to make it look the way they expect it to look.
But Barry, the one thing I would, to a degree, disagree with you on part of that, a small part. I mean, there is, in fact, I've gone so far as to say, please don't send that to me. Anytime a client wants me to send me a bunch of floor plans with a bunch of carrots in the corners and whatever, I'm like, let me know the spaces we need to capture. But you're paying me to go in there and capture the spaces. And I know and what the furniture is and everything, what's going to be the angle on that space. Probably, could be where that little arrow or that carrot is, but more likely until I'm in that space and can see what's in that space and see what the lighting in that space is. There's so many things that impact how a space can be conveyed and how you want to convey it, that sometimes I can't tell you how many times I've gone into a space and the architect says the shot is from here, and I'm like, no, the shot is from over here, and they say, no, the shot is from here, and I say, okay, we'll do it both ways. We'll shoot it from there, we're going to shoot it from over here, and then you'll see, because we understand how the camera also interprets a space, where the architect only understands how the eye interprets a space.
Oh no, I agree with you entirely, and that's my strategy also. If they're really insistent, I will shoot it both ways, even though I know I'm right. Every now and then I'm wrong. I'm as perfect as all of us, so we don't make too many mistakes, none of us. But but I do shoot it both ways, and one of the advantages to showing people on a laptop or an iPad is they get it on the spot, and the temperature goes down, and that's That's great. But no, I'm totally in agreement with you, Brett.
Yeah, I agree with that 100% too. And I think, Barry, you've talked about this in some of your seminars before. Composition, I mean, you can teach anybody technical things on how to light and how to run cameras. Composition, that's something, I mean, that makes the photographer, and a photographer
Yeah.
should walk into a space and intuitively know the best compositions.
It's very personal.
I
That's the
want
personal aspect
It
of
is
it, isn't it?
personal, yeah, but that does
I
make
want to
it.
wholeheartedly agree with Brad. Just I am an architect, and I that every once in a while I get a real complicated plan and it has all these arrows all over the place. It's a total waste of my time to try to figure out what room I'm in from his floor plan and where the arrow is and where he wants me to stand, as opposed to looking at the space like you're all saying and looking for where the right angle is. We all, if we're good photographers, we all know the second we walk into the space, we know exactly where the best shot is. We might take 2 or 3 other spots, but we know that the first place that we planted ourselves is the best place. And I don't want some architect drawing a bunch of lines on a plan and me trying to orientate myself to what he's looking. Forget it. I just shoot it, ignore that. And the only thing I make sure of is if he's got a bunch of arrows in a certain room, I make sure I really cover that room nicely. But that's it.
Also, in the real world, the architects are not there most of the time for the whole day, or maybe there's a marketing person that might be there, but they it's hurry up and wait. And I think there's all kinds of ways this can work, and some people are very, very collaborative and work with you, and that's great. But very often, they show you the arrows and then they're gone, or they never showed up in the first place. So
I will say I tend to be very insistent that the architect is there.
Yeah.
And the reason why, I mean, there's 2 reasons why. One's a personal reason and one's a professional reason. The personal reason is because of my history. I enjoy the collaboration with the architect, and I feel I can be a better storyteller of being able to tell their story if I better understand their design. And being able to understand their design is being able to have them there to articulate that to me as we're shooting and make sure that the images are conveying the story that they need to tell, so that they can then at a later date be able to use those images in a presentation or whatever to articulate that project. From a professional side, I have said way too many times in my career, I'm a photographer. I'm not a mind reader. And I am not going to go back to a project because we didn't capture something in a certain way that somebody wanted because they couldn't take time out of their day to be there.
No, there's nothing better than having them there.
Good point.
I agree.
I want to go back to what Brad was talking about earlier, just kind of to maybe bring this discussion around kind of full circle where I started. Brad talked about being authentic to the space and shooting in a way where we're not creating something that wasn't there originally, and respecting the design and things like that. And to me, that again speaks to the fact of controlling the lighting situation that's there, the contrast range, and making that something that we can actually capture, because typically it's a range that we cannot capture. Our eyes see it one way and it looks great to the architect or the interior designer and something, but we may have to supplement that. And Barry spoke to this as well. I just wanted to mention an experience I had a couple of days ago. I had a real estate photographer shadow me that was the wife of the project manager for a project I was shooting. And I meter things. I mean, I still have a meter. And so I took out my spot meter, and this is where I start when I do a shoot, was with my spot meter. And I wanted to see what the contrast range was for the scene. And this photographer had never seen a spot meter before, and the whole concept was just so foreign that I was considering, what the contrast range was of the scene. And I tried to explain that I'm trying to see what I need to do to compress that range so that what I have on, as a finished photograph looks like what we're seeing standing here. And I think that's, maybe I'm wrong, Brad, but I think that's kind of what you're talking about. In about, and obviously we're going to stand in the right place. Like Ansel Adams said, that a good photograph is just knowing where to stand. And I think that's kind of what we're trying to do. But we need to have control over those, and that may be lighting, it may not be lighting, it may be bracketing, it may be, grip equipment. It may be that I drag out that 7-foot umbrella and make it look like a window light or something like that, or put it outside the building through the window to whatever. Those are techniques, but to be authentic to the situation there. And I think for most situations, capturing the space in an authentic way is really what's going to be the most successful. Am I hitting?
I concur, man. I absolutely agree with you. That's important. I mean, we don't want to create something that isn't there, and I think a lot of times with a photographer that doesn't have a good skill set, that's what they do, by not being able to control their camera. But that's, that is so important. It should be what we're looking at. It should be beautiful. It should be a good representation of what we're seeing.
And Norman, I can say that I see just as much not the photographers that can't control their camera as the photographers that don't know what they're doing with their lighting.
Oh, I agree with that, Brad.
I mean,
you're absolutely right. I mean, he brings up a light meter. I was at a shoot last year, a year before, and I took a light meter out, and there was another photographer there. He goes, "What's that?" I said, "You're kidding." I always have one in my bag. I use it all the time. He had no idea, never seen a light meter. So I mean,
So there's just two things I wanted to mention because Barry talked about this. I've always learned, because I shot a lot of advertising projects for agencies in the past, is you want to enhance the scene too. So it's something about capturing and being authentic, but like Barry says, we want to enhance that scene. The other thing I want to mention is most of the time I want to live in that scene for a while. I want to walk around that scene. I want to get a feel for it. And that's why I scout. But if I don't have a chance to scout, you can come in that room the first 2 minutes, and then after about 10 minutes, it kind of has a different feel. So I want to live in that space, not too long, but I just want to get a feel for it rather than just showing up and saying, this is the spot. So.
Yeah.
And David, I wanted to say I agree with you entirely in that, when you're doing work for an agency, that's a whole different animal than when you're doing work for an architect. And even doing work for an interior designer.
Mhm.
So I think everything has a place and time. And I just really choose my places where lighting is something that's going to be a component in what I'm doing, and when it's not. I mean, what you can do and how you do it in a home is very different than what you do when you're shooting a 6-story higher ed building or a hospital or those type of things.
Those types of spaces, I'm typically finding myself using hardly any lighting at all. I think somebody said this earlier when we were talking about when do you use lighting more often. For me, it's in scenarios where that creative leash is a little longer. If you're shooting a hospital lobby, maybe that creative leash is a little shorter. Unless there are big windows, maybe you can get away with adding backlight or side light to something. But I'm in the real world, I'm probably implementing lighting much less in those commercial spaces, to be honest with you, and probably a lot more in residential ones, just practically speaking. Probably for that reason, Brad, that it kind of doesn't make sense in certain spaces. The lawyer's office conference room probably doesn't need to look, like the set of a sci-fi movie all the time. Sometimes it needs to look like a lawyer's office.
Sometimes they look like sci-fi.
Sometimes they are.
But that's rare. That's pretty rare.
Yeah. Well, sometimes it's just a brown table,
Yeah.
with a TV on the wall, right?
And louvers.
So,
Right.
the other thing I find too, we talk about lighting. I get a lot of calls from photographers and a lot of people on LinkedIn. And Norman, I'm getting into architectural photography, and they have questions, and I hope and I think everybody here would help somebody like that out. But I also find that I mean, just looking at this picture here, aside from Kyle, all of us started out in film, and I think. Working in film and understanding lighting and lighting ratios has really benefited all of us in the digital world. Working in a digital darkroom is very similar to working in a chemical darkroom. The tools are the emulation's the same. The practice is a little bit different, and that's hard sometimes to translate to somebody that's never worked in film, that's never worked with a set of lights, that's never been on a commercial set, that's never shot a commercial. So it's hard it's hard to help a newer guy with lighting because as a practice they don't understand it and they're not familiar with it. And for us, it was an easy transition because that's what we worked with.
It's interesting. I will say along those lines of having worked in film and shot 4x5 for 17 years, that, I've worked with art directors that have said to me that I would rather work with someone who first worked in film than somebody who only worked in the digital world. And the reason is that film was like clay. You needed to know how you were going to, that you were using whether you shooting tungsten film or daylight film, you mentioned filtering fluorescent lights. You needed to know, you need to have a vision so that you could craft your image.
Yeah.
And the problem is with people who've only had digital, whatever pops up on the back of the camera, there's the belief that that is the end product. And therefore, having that vision and knowing how to craft that vision is what is lacking, and something that I'm glad that I shot film for as long as I did to help me get to that point.
Yeah, really well said, Brett.
And to speak kind of back to what Norman was saying, I think there's an element of pre-visualization that kind of differentiates those doing this at the highest level from those that aren't. That we see something maybe that other people aren't practiced enough to see yet, and so we know where we want to be and how to get there, rather than the back of the camera is the end result, and that's where we end up. So
well, also along the, sometimes lighting is done by bracketing. So that, it should, but even so, it should still look the way it should look natural, whether you have lit or not. So, in the end, it's lighting or not lighting, all the things that we've talked about here. But in the end, the picture's got to be a good looking picture.
Yeah.
And the idea that I think one of the hallmarks, I hate to go back to, well, I don't hate, but I think it's important to go back to thinking about Architectural Digest 30, 40 years ago. Those photos looked lit, as like you were saying, Alan. That was part of the desire.
Yeah.
And that bled directly into all kinds of other photography, including commercial advertising. So, anyway, I don't really have anything more to say than that, but it's becomes a matter of taste in a certain respect.
So along those lines, Barry, when and like I said, I hope everybody does this. When someone reaches out to a young photographer and they need help with something, there's plenty of work for everybody. So I'm not ever worried about losing work, or who cares? Plenty of work. Really helping them out. I mean, and that goes back in 2000 when I was shooting models. A guy walks through my studio door and says, "I want you to photograph some houses for me," a builder. I didn't know anything about it. I got a hold of Alan I emailed him, hey, how do I do this? He sends me pages and pages and pages of stuff of what to do, how to set the camera up, and that's how I got started. But his help is the reason I always remember that, because if someone asks me something, I'm going to take the time and educate them. And I think it's important. I'd like to see a lot more, young guys here in the AIAP shooting. And I think that, if we help them, if we mentor them, it just brings everything up a level.
Mhm.
I think that's beneficial for all of us, including them.
Thanks, Norm. I appreciate that. I
We
agree.
used to be young, Norman.
Yeah.
What do you mean used to be?
Yeah, I was young, man, 40 years ago, uh, but I didn't know Alan. He didn't know me. Man, I'm telling you, he
Alan's an amazing
took the
resource.
time. I still have the pages he sent me.
It's also, it feels good to, have a little bit of experience that you can share with other people. You're not trying to make them clones. You're trying to inspire them to experiment a
Yeah.
little.
I want to add on to something that the other Barry said, which is when you teach, if you're a good teacher,
Mhm.
it kind of behooves you to know what you're talking about. And so it has upped my game in lots of ways, from marketing to digital workflow. If I'm going to open my mouth and make suggestions about act like a mentor in some fashion, I better know what I'm doing, and better know what I'm talking about, which forces one also to pay attention to what's going on in the world around you, so that some people, they just have their track that they go down. But there's so many different ways to do things, and there's so many different situations that we all find ourselves in, that the broader experience you have, one of the ways you get that experience is by looking around at the world around you, the
Mhm.
better teacher you would be. And hopefully you pass that on. So
I'm nowhere close to being a young man, but I'm a young photographer. And the wisdom I get from all you guys is amazing. And I can't imagine why there aren't a bunch of young men and women on a call like this. I every
Yeah.
session we've had, I've taken notes like this,
Yeah,
and
well, I
I
do
study
too.
them afterwards, and I learn from you guys. And it's amazing the wisdom that you are sharing, and it's nuts for somebody young not to
Glenn,
take
I
advantage.
share that. I share that same thing with other people. The photographers. I tell them, "Hey, join the AIAP. Here you go." I send them the link, and I just Monday I had a guy come back. He goes, "You got to pay for this?" I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" I said, "It's peanuts. It's pocket change. What are you talking about? You got
yeah,
to pay for this?" There's
Yeah.
just. But you're right. The education, and iron sharpens iron. We get that. I learn things from you guys all the time. Every time we sit here and talk, I learn something.
yeah.
And,
But
and I've been
look
doing
at how
this.
many
I've been doing
people
this for
have
30 years. So
look at how many people have paid and are members, but they're
yeah,
not here on this call.
Mhm.
They've
I don't get
already
that
paid the
either.
money.
I
They're
find
not
that
here.
interesting too. Every time you guys talk, I learn something new,
Yeah, I think you do.
and it's just great.
Yeah, and
Well, and
and,
I haven't
and
been doing this that long either. I mean, 20, 21, 22 years. I had another career before I did this.
yeah,
So it was in the building trade. So I'm still around buildings all the time. But yeah,
There,
without the help of other people, I would be, yeah, I don't know, I'd be a kitchen designer
yeah.
and,
Well, that's
and drinking too
There are
much.
worse things.
so
Yeah.
something I learned about 10 years ago. I was back east and shooting for a developer that was putting together these small office spaces for creatives, because he says creatives love community, but usually creatives are one-on-one. But I fully believe that. I met with another photographer in Portland yesterday. I haven't met with him for probably uh, 20 years. It was a place called U Develop that we used to always be there for rental darkroom.
Hmm.
And he says, nobody's reached out to me in so many years, and it's been 8 years since he's met another photographer. And this is a photographer who's got a huge studio in Portland. He employs 200 uh,
Oh,
employees around the country and in Hong Kong. But he says, you're the first one that's reached out. And I've known him for years, but I haven't talked to him in a long time. So my point is, we need to reach out more, having coffee with other photographers in the area. Sometimes our competitors in the same market, we don't want to really share too much with them, but if they're buddies, some of those fences come down. And I'm a true believer in having a community with other photographers, and I appreciate all your guys' time, valuable time, to be on these calls.
Yeah,
And hats off to Alan for putting it together.
yeah, and Barry Grossman, I've seen a lot of your videos, and you're a patient T-shirt. I could never do what you do, which was why I could never do it. But a lot of times Barry will be setting up a shot and he's talking, and and I'm looking, I'm like, man, I wouldn't do it like that at all. I think I'd get a similar result, but by seeing how somebody else does it, you got that in the back of your mind when you're in a situation and what you're doing doesn't work. Now you've got something back to fall back on. So that's the other thing that these meetings do for us, because I learn different techniques from you gentlemen, and it's benefited me immensely. And I mean, it kills me when I miss one of these meetings, because it's so educational. And I've been doing this for 30 years. So,
well, and I think there's been a real shift in industry wise, because I mean, in the film days, you were at the lab, you were at the light table.
Yeah.
A fellow photographer would come in and you go, hey, just got back this from this shoot, and you'd have the community of connecting at the lab.
I missed that.
Lab doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Where do people connect? And on a positive way, this allows people to connect hypothetically more universally.
Yeah.
We're not all in the same city or in the same state. But, I do think, when I get to the point where I think I know everything, then I should really not be doing it, because there's always something to learn. There's always something to gain. I can't tell you how many times I've picked up a little thing here, a little thing there, that's made me ever so slightly better of a photographer. So you've always got to be open to growing.
Yeah, the thing I love about photography is every job that I go to is different. None of them are ever the same. So I'm learning something while I'm on the set, or if I'm shooting real estate, I learn something different because the lighting is different and everything else. So for me, listening to you guys, which all have a lot more experience than I do, even though I may look a little old, but it's not much I can do about that. But but I'll tell you, I started my photography, believe it or not, when I was in the Navy. I worked in the intelligence field and spent my time hanging off the side of a patrol boat, taking pictures of ships and different interesting things. And that's how I got to where I am today. And I'm so thankful for that little box that I was able to hold in my hand to get here where I'm at, and to be able to be here with you guys who have all this experience, and I just love everything about it. So I say thank you to all of you, and to Alan for putting this together, because it is absolutely wonderful.
Thanks, Gerald. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it is.
Let's wrap up, gentlemen. I think this is a good place to kind of put an end to the discussion. This has been really useful information. I'm looking forward to listening to this again and kind of digesting this. And thank you for the experience and expertise and insights that you've been really generous with offering. I know that for the people that listen to this that are outside the organization, this is going to be either really insightful or completely confusing. So
welcome to my world.
I appreciate it, but it's the discussion was at a level that I think was really useful. It kind of transcended equipment and specific techniques, which is what I was hoping for. So thank you so much. So I'm going to close the meeting here. We'll stick around for conversation afterward if you'd like, but again, thank you. We'll send out a notice for the meeting for next week, and until then, stay well, and success to everyone. Thank you.
Thanks.
This has been another episode of A Photographer's Life. If you've enjoyed this program, please let us know by liking this episode and subscribing to this channel. A Photographer's Life is brought to you by the Association of Independent Architectural Photographers. This episode is copyrighted, and may not be used in full or in part, without the written permission of the AIAP. Please join us again soon for another inside look at the world of professional architectural photography.